Good afternoon, TRP. Hope everyone is ready for the ride today. Uh, we're going to look at some interesting things and we will see what our views of the parables are by the time we come to the end. So, this evening we're going to talk about the Good Shepmaritan. Some of you may be wondering, how come we have never heard of this parable before? The Good Shepmaritan? Are you sure that's one of the parables that Jesus told? Well, let's see. There are striking parallels between the Master Shepherd of Psalm 23 and the Good Samaritan of Luke 10. In Psalm 23, David, the Master Shepherd, takes on the stance of a sheep, with God as the shepherd, the Good Shepherd. He outlines the rich qualities of a shepherd and the blessings it grants to a sheep. And those of you who were with us a few weeks ago will remember that we covered that. Now, as we saw in Psalm 23, David, the Master Shepherd, takes the stance of a sheep, and he ascribes to God the attributes of a shepherd. He then outlines the rich qualities of a shepherd and the blessings that it grants to the sheep. This is just a quick review for those who did not hear the first one. So, what are some of these qualities? Psalm 23 says, a good shepherd provides for and nourishes his sheep. A good shepherd makes them lie down in green pastures, leads them beside still waters, restores their souls, leads them in the path of righteousness, successfully leads the sheep through the valley of the shadow of death. Psalm 23 says, a good shepherd provides for the welfare of the sheep and calms them with his presence. A good shepherd comforts them with his rod and his staff. A good shepherd prepares for their nourishment even before their enemies, and the enemies have to watch and can do nothing about it. A good shepherd will anoint the heads of the sheep with oil mixed with Lysol to keep the bugs away. He will surround them with goodness and mercy all their lives, and he will cause them to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, the question becomes, did Jesus have Psalm 23 in mind when he chose the imagery of the Good Shepherd? When he says, I am the Good Shepherd, did he have that imagery in mind? Now, let's look at some of the imagery of Psalm 23 and compare them with some of what Jesus said. And then you can decide for yourself whether Jesus might have had Psalm 23 in mind. In John 10, 3-4, he says he leads his sheep. And he says the sheep will not follow a stranger, but will flee from them. Now, what did David say in Psalm 23? David said, he leads me beside still waters. So here we have in both Psalm 23 verse 2 and John 10, the idea of a shepherd leading the sheep. Psalm 23, he leads me. And David says, and Jesus said, I lead my sheep and they follow me, right? In Psalm 23, verse 2b, it says, he leads me beside still waters. And there you have that image that we had of Jesus leading the sheep. But notice in Psalm 23, verse 2a, it says, he makes me lie down in green pastures, that is watered pastures, green, lush food. And we'll talk about that in a minute. recall that a sheep will not lie down unless 4 conditions are met. The sheep must be well fed. He must be fed. The sheep must not have friction or conflict with any other of its kind, any other sheep, a lamb or a ram. There should be no conflict. The sheep must be free from bugs. That is to say, there should not be any warble flies or those flies that would want to lay in eggs in its nostrils. None of those should be present. There should be no ticks on the body. If these things are present, the sheep will not lie down. And the 4th thing is that there should be no enemy or anything that will disturb it around. And what gives the sheep the greatest contentment to lie down and sleep, what is most calming for the sheep is the presence of the shepherd. Notice what Jesus says in John 10:3-4. Not only does he lead the sheep, he says the stranger, the sheep will not follow, but will flee. A shepherd tells the story of being visited by a friend from the city. And the friend came driving in her car, her posh car, and had in the car her dog. And as soon as she opened the door, out jumped the dog. The sheep were not accustomed to this dog. And just the presence of this small dog, it was not even a huge dog that would create a problem for them. A small dog. They panicked and began to scatter because they saw it as an enemy. An enemy they will not follow, but the presence of the shepherd will calm them. Think whether or not Jesus had that in mind when he said this. In John 10:9, Jesus says, I am the gate. Those who come in by the way of the gate will be saved and will go in and out and find green pastures. That's how Taylor's Living Bible puts it. Psalm 23:2 says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. You see the imagery there, green pastures in both. Recall that the sheep will not lie down unless it's well fed. Green pastures in a desert highlights the excellent care and the provision the Good Shepherd makes for his flock. And remember that nothing calms a sheep as the master's presence. So when Jesus says that he'll go in and out and find good pastures, he's talking about the nourishment of his sheep. And what he's saying is, as the master shepherd, as the good shepherd, the kind of nourishment he will give the flock is nothing like what a stranger or an enemy or an ordinary shepherd will give. Don't you think the idea of green pastures from Psalm 23 might have been in his mind? Well, I'll let you make up your mind. Here is another imagery. In John 10:10, Jesus says, the thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. And he says, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. How does that compare with Psalm 23? Psalm 23 says, yea, though I walk through the what? The valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. So notice there that the thief comes not only to steal and to kill and to destroy. Jesus is here to give life. And the shepherd gives life to the sheep while walking through the shadow of death, because he protects the sheep so that the enemies, the coyotes, the mountain lions, the attackers would not be able to get to the sheep, because the protection of the master shepherd is there, and the other shepherds that he has with him, they are there so that the sheep can feel comfortable. Notice he says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Which means that, again, when Jesus says that the thief comes to steal and to kill and to destroy, because he is the good shepherd and he is there, then the sheep don't have to fear any evil, because those who are coming in will not be able to attack it, because the master is there. Thou preparest the table in the presence of mine enemies. He has the lush green grass, while, as I told you last time, the grass on the hillsides of Palestine, the grass is brown because of a lack of water. This is green grass because the Lord is watering. Jesus, the good shepherd, is watering the soil and making sure that the provisions that are there for the sheep will be the best. It will be green, not brown, because there's water so that it can grow and be what it ought to be. I told you about anointest my head with oil, bugs and the flies away, prevent them from laying eggs that will, in the nostrils, that will go into larva, that will crawl about in the nostrils, that the sheep isn't able to control, and then go knock its head against a stone or against a tree to kill itself. The shepherd is going to make a mixture of Lysol and olive oil and put that over the head of the sheep. That will therefore keep the flies away and these pests away, so the sheep can be contented. Jesus doubtlessly had that in mind when he said that I am going to give you life and more abundant life, because it was going to be a satisfied, a satisfying, a filling, a protective life that I'm going to give to you. It is a given that Jesus identifies himself as the Good Shepherd. And there were in Palestine, at the time of Jesus, before and at his time, there were two kinds of shepherds. One, there was the owner shepherd who would hire hired shepherds or underlings who would then take the sheep out to pasture. And there would be a 7-year cycle, as I told you last time. That's why Jacob worked for Leah and Rachel for 14 years, because there was a 7-year cycle. But they would come home every year to shear the sheep. That's the imagery that Jesus had in mind when he says, he talks about he's the good shepherd and the sheep will follow him, but they will not follow an underling, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But notice here that if Jesus is the owner shepherd, if Jesus is the master shepherd, then his disciples that he trained, the 12 and the wider circle of disciples, were under shepherds. They were underlings, under shepherds who did the bidding of the master shepherd. By implication, therefore, it means that you and I, as under shepherds of the master, have an obligation. We have something to do for God's sheep. God is not here on earth. Jesus is not here anymore, and the sheep need to be taken care of. So yes, there are hired shepherds like pastors who take care of God's flock. But there are under shepherds, like the disciples, who also have a responsibility to take care of God's sheep. And God has called us and given us that responsibility to help him in the work of providing for his sheep. I'd like for us to go now to the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan. What is the rationale behind this parable? It appears as though a young man came to Jesus, as Luke 10:25-30 suggests. And this young man, an intelligent lawyer, came to Jesus and asked a question. And he thought, being a learned and trained guy, he would trouble Jesus with this question, who would not be able to immediately answer the question. And when he asked the question and Jesus was able to answer it immediately, it shocked him. And he was not expecting the answer that he got. Jesus told him to go read the law. He said he had kept that from his youth. And when Jesus answered him, he wasn't ready. So he tried to hit back at Jesus by using a question that the rabbis, the lawyers, the learned people of Jesus's day was bantering between themselves to try to answer, who is my neighbor? Because as far as they were concerned, the Samaritans, the Gentiles, these were outsiders, and these people could not be their neighbors. They would never treat them as their neighbor. So to make a good comeback, he threw that story at Jesus to see how Jesus would answer the question of who is my neighbor. According to Luke 2:30, Jesus told this parable then, and according to Luke 2:30, a man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. That imagery is geographically correct. Jerusalem was some 2,300 feet above sea level. Jericho was 1,300 feet below sea level. Some scholars will say Jerusalem was 2,600 feet above sea level. And Jericho was about 1,700 to 1,000 below sea level. But at any rate, there was a total drop of some 3,600 feet in 17 to 20 miles between Jerusalem and Jericho. So yes, the man was going down. The story is also culturally correct. So not only is it geographically correct, it is culturally correct. The road meanders and it goes circles around rocky gorges. It's really, even today, it's a terrain that is not easily followed. On one of my trips or to the region, I actually drove through the ancient, along the ancient Roman road, and was taken to the scene where the parable allegedly took place, and the area is known as the Ascent of Blood. It was an area where, notice now, not petty thieves, not thieves, but bandits. It was the haunt of bandits. They would hide in some of those caves and areas and gorges, and unsuspecting travelers would then be attacked. So Here's what Jesus did. Very recently, at a time when Jesus was speaking, as some of us scholars believe, there was an incident at which a man was traveling, literally traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And when he got to the area known as the Ascent of Blood, he was attacked. And the story was fresh in the minds of the hearers. So Jesus used that story as the setting for his answer to the Good Samaritan and to the question that Stan asked at the beginning. Yes, Jesus used to use contemporary scenes. For example, when he told the story of the 10 virgins, we believe it was at twilight, and he was looking down at a wedding procession where they were traveling with the torches for the bridegroom to go pick up his bride to take him home. Jesus used contemporary events to teach truth so that when people would see these things, even when he was not there, they would be learning. So Jesus took pleasure in teaching in his absence. And as a teacher, that's one of the things I strove for. I wanted to learn to teach in my absence. And I remember the first time a student said to me, Mr. Melbourne, you remember what we were talking about in class the other day? I saw this. And I said, yes. If as preachers and pastors and teachers and if we can learn to use illustrations that will attract the attention of people, even when we are not there, they will continue to learn. What a wonderful concept. That's what Jesus did. So here's the scene. The man, possibly a Jew, lay dying. A priest expected to love others, avoids him. A Levite expected to care for others, shuns him. A Samaritan, a scorned, untouchable because of his mixed ancestry, mixture of Jews and Gentile, Jews and Assyrians. He ironically becomes the hero of the story. Now, I gotta tell you this. For Jesus's audience, here's another trick Jesus used in his teaching, why his teaching is so memorable. They taught in what we call a triadic mode, in triads, which means that the story was told in threes. So once Jesus said a man lay dying because he was attacked by robbers, the first character to pass was a priest, a religious person. The second character is a Levite, a religious person. Everybody expected the third character to have been a religious person. So they were sure he was going to say the third person was an elder. But what Jesus did was to shock them by using someone other than a religious figure. But if that was all the shock, it would not be bad. He went further than that. And what he did, he made the hero of the story a Samaritan. Someone with whom to eat the food of a Samaritan was like eating pork. Something a Jew would never do. So to make a Samaritan the hero of the story was unforgivable, but it was also unforgettable. And remember the question, who is my neighbor? And before we come to the end, I'll show you that instead of saying who the neighbor is or was, Jesus changed the question. So we'll come to that. So the Samaritan is an untouchable, scorned person, but he becomes the hero. And what does he do? He cleanses and mollifies the wound. That is to say, he went in his bag, he got some wine, and the wine has alcohol, and he poured the alcohol there so that the alcohol would clean the wound. Then he poured the oil in to mollify it, to soothe it. Then he bandaged it, and he transports the man to the inn. We'll come back to that. Point number 2. The worldviews of the characters in the story are interesting, to say the least. The worldview, the philosophy of the robbers was, what is yours is mine, I will take it. That's very childish. What is yours is mine, I'll take it. You remember when we were children, if you watch children at play, they don't mind taking the other person's toy because they haven't yet learned to discriminate. They have to be taught. The robbers were adults acting like children. What is yours is mine, I'm going to take it. The priest and the Levite, their philosophy, their worldview was, what is mine, I'll keep it. And I guess I cannot help but wonder here if that's not the philosophy of some of us today. We are right now in the midst of a pandemic. Right now, in a time when I need to recognize that my breath, my speaking could transmit a disease that could cause the death of my neighbor. Am I responsible enough to say, I will cover my mouth, I will cover my nose, so what is mine will not go to affect somebody else? Or am I going to act childishly or narcissistically and egotistically? Because yes, the behavior of the priest and the Levite was narcissistic and egotistical. But friends, I like the philosophy of the Samaritan. What is mine is ours. Let's share it. This does not mean that we should share the COVID with others. What it means is that we should be responsible enough not only to protect ourselves, but also protect our neighbors. This is altruistic. Note that the Samaritan did not say, what is mine is yours, I'll give you. That's not what he says. He didn't say, what is mine is yours, I'll give you. No. We love our neighbors as ourselves, not more than ourselves. So the protection that I want for myself, I will share with others. Now, there are striking parallels here with Psalm 23. The Jew was wounded on the ascent of blood, where the bandits used to hang out, awaiting unsuspecting praise who traveled from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is equivalent to the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23, where the coyotes, the mountain lions, and the other animals of prey would hang out to lay wait for passing shepherds and their sheep. So the ascent of blood and the valley of the shadow of death parallels in both Luke and Psalm 23. The Samaritan made the wounded man lie down in the inn. The inn is equivalent to green pastures. He says, he restores my soul, coming to his rescue as a shepherd would to a cast sheep. That is to say, the Samaritan came to the rescue of the wounded man, just as a shepherd would come to the rescue of a cast sheep. And those of you who saw the presentation last week, 2 weeks ago, saw how the shepherd came. And for those of you who were not there, one thing a sheep isn't able to do, if the sheep falls over and is lying on its back with the feet in the air, it cannot it cannot get onto its side and get back onto its feet. It cannot get back onto its feet from its back. So it's going to stay there and kick and kick and kick, unable to get any traction to get up until it dies. A calf sheep will die if it's not helped. That's why a shepherd has to go to restore its soul. If the Good Samaritan had not helped the wounded man, he would have laid there to die if nobody else passed that way. Using wine to cleanse the wounds to prevent infection. He poured oil to mollify the wound, that is to calm the throbbing, to soothe the pain, to reduce the swelling and bring the healing process, begin the healing process. This is akin to a shepherd anointing the sheep's head with oil and Lysol to calm and soothe the sheep and to keep away the bugs that wanted to lay eggs in the sheep's nose. The Samaritan prepared a place in the inn for the wounded Jew by paying for his keep. Remember, he paid 2 pennies. This is just as a shepherd would prepare a table in the presence. Just as shepherd would prepare a table in the tablelands for the security of his sheep and the satisfaction of their stomachs. Thou preparest a table for me in the presence of mine enemies, David says. The Samaritan prepared a place for the wounded man by giving 2 days' wages. When it says he paid 2 pennies, most of us today throw away 2 cents, the cents, we don't want them. Some of us even throw away dimes, and some of us, throw away 5 cents. We don't want them. So we don't understand the value here. Then a day's wage was about a penny, a denarius. So he had to pay 2 days' wages. But not only did he pay 2 days' wages, he promised that if it cost more to take care of the man, when he returned, he would pay the extra amount. In other words, he provided surplus. He made arrangements for more than the man would need. David says, my cup runneth over, meaning there is more than an adequate supply of provisions. The shepherd would make sure there would be more than an adequate supply of provisions, and the good Samaritan made sure that there was more than adequate supply for the needs of the wounded man. David also says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. The Samaritan's mercy and goodness would be remembered by the Jew for the rest of his life. Psalm 23, he restores my soul, is paralleled by the restoration that came to the wounded Jew following the intervention of the Samaritan. Jesus thus reversed the question. The man asks, who is my neighbor? Jesus says, more important than who is my neighbor is, am I neighborly? So the question is not who is my neighbor? The question is, am I neighborly? Am I a good neighbor? Take the focus off others. Stop watching what others do or whether others qualify. Treat others like God treats us. If God should treat us this way, we would die in our sins. But he loves us anyway and comes in search of us. We need to go in search of others by being neighborly. Point number 4, the robbers say no self-interest must always be first. So the question is, am I neighborly? The robbers say that doesn't matter. Self-interest must always be first. The priests and the Levites say no, and their actions suggest that synagogue and church, or synagogue or church, is not a place of restoration. In other words, synagogue or church is a hotel for the healthy, not a hospital for the sick. And what Jesus is saying, church or synagogue is a place for both whole and sick. It's a place where restoration can take place, and it's a place where the health of those who are healthy can be maintained. Their hurried exit also say that ecclesiastical functioning is more important than compassionate caring service to others, especially the needy and the downtrodden. The Samaritan knew that if the roles were reversed, there would be no care for him, but he cared anyway. This is exemplary pastoral discipleship and caring action for all of us. Point number 5, and we're nearing the end now, is that because of the striking parallels between Psalm 23 and the Good Shepherd on the one hand, and the parallels between the Good Shepherd and the Good Samaritan on the other, Melbourne has chosen to coin the term the Good Shepmaritan. The Good Shepherd, Maritan, so the Good Shepherd marrying the two, the Good Shepmaritan, to represent the pastoral care, the Christian discipleship traits, the characteristics outlined here that we all need to exemplify in the world as representatives of God. So in concluding, what then is my role in disciple making, in Christian nurturing, in Christian caring, the Christian caring enterprise? The question is not what role should the pastor play, not what role should Stan play, not what role should somebody else play. The question is, what is my role? I must adopt the mind of Christ and act as Christ would act. I should defend the needy, those on the margins, the poor, the social outcasts, the defenseless ones. I should treat others I would want to be treated. I would respect and care for others regardless of gender, race, nationality, place of origin, or status. What then is my role in discipleship making? I must see each person I meet as a child of God and thus deserving of my utmost best. I should recognize that I am blessed to bless. I must seriously consider that I am God's eyes, God's ears, God's mouth, God's hands, and God's feet in today's world. That's what God has called me to be. That's what God has called you to be and do. May we all be good representatives of God. Thank you.